inopportune time. I was at the BOC meeting last week and I leaned back and went,
Kim, do you have one of these there?
mm-hmm.
Oh, we had an extra? Okay.
Does anyone not have a package?
I think so. Everyone's got one. But in the packet, you can have his application, which is the one that we I grew up with applications. Get used to it. All that way. That's been most of it.
Hi,
How are you?
good.
And when minutes by my watch, because I can't read that.
Yeah, I've just been kind of waiting it. I don't have my watch.
It's too far away for me to read that one. So I got 2 minutes.
We bought that house.
Yours has 2 minutes too.
It does.
So. What else? Bag is a lot better.
But then you ate Chinese food.
Ate some piece of chicken. Beef teriyaki.
Chicken, vegetables, no. But then the crab rangoon and then fried dumpling. So it throws it all off.
I didn't eat either of those, but I did.
Well, I think we're close enough. We can start. One more minute? Oh, okay. We'll wait one more minute.
Half a minute?
It's 6:30.
She's got it, 6:30 exactly.
Okay. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Can we please have the roll call, please?
Chairman Colianos,
Here.
Mr. Bolton,
Here.
Mr. Tunstall,
Here.
Ms. Proto-Remindis,
Here.
Ms. Page,
Here.
do you want to call the alternate? Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any public comments this evening? Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll have the quasi-judicial announcement and swearing in of speakers.
This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Heritage Preservation Board acts in a quasi-judicial rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at this hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. At this time, anyone wishing to speak this evening, would you please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn in? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our first case is CA 1646, First United Methodist Church, 501 East Tarpon Avenue. Replace window with new door construct and construct a new ramped sidewalk and construct a covered roof between the two sanctuaries to provide improved handicap accessibility. And can I hear from the city, please, on this?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see all of our members and our alternate here. I'd like to welcome our alternate to the board and our new member who was an alternate moved up to the main board. So thank you for everybody being here. Again, the application is requesting a certificate of approval for the following work: remove a window, add a new door and side light, add a ramped walkway between the structures, and place a canopy over the walkway between the sanctuaries. The address for the property is 501 East Tarpon Avenue. The architectural style is the mission style, and this is located in residential office general and residential office use. The current use of the structure is for a church. The Faith Chapel was built in 1920 in the mission style. It's an example of architecture in the modern area. The structure is a contributing resource, and the main features include arch windows and buttresses, and the main church remains intact, but other buildings are now connected to the structure at the rear. The site includes a new sanctuary that was built in 1974, among other structures. Again, the applicant is seeking the certificate of approval for the work above. The applicant will be replacing the existing concrete between the buildings with a ramped sidewalk and installing a new canopy over the area between the Faith Chapel and the 1974 sanctuary. The changes are being requested to improve the handicap accessibility between the structures, and I've kind of put pictures in between or throughout the report to kind of illustrate what they're doing so everyone could follow along. It's a little bit harder to see what's actually happening here because of the types of windows and things that are being addressed. But I think you can follow along as you see the different pictures. With that, under the analysis section of your report, the proposed windows to be removed in the rear of the Faith Chapel. The window is not one of the arched windows, which was noted in the master file. The master file for this structure. The original chapel was connected to other structures on the property in the recent past through additions to the structure. The door that is proposed is more consistent with the later additions of the building. The area where the alterations are to occur are not visible from the street and should have no negative impact on the surrounding structures. Because there's an alcove, because of the way that the addition came along, it's kind of in a hidden area back here also with the trees, so you're not going to see this if you're walking down the sidewalk in the rear, and you're definitely not going to see it from Tarpon Avenue because we're on the back side of the building. So there's going to be limited visibility to these changes. We still need to make sure that they are consistent with what we expect for this particular building. On to the next criteria. The proposed changes are consistent. Oh, wait a minute, excuse me. Let me go back. While the architecture of the Faith Chapel and the later alterations are in the Mediterranean style, it is important to note that the structure is an example of modern era construction. And then I went into a little bit of information on the modern era construction is based on the notion of form follows function, the principle expressed by Franklin Lloyd Wright. The modern era is defined by the use of a newly available building materials, including sheet glass and steel. The proposed door, which made of new materials, is common to the post-war period, embracing the ideals of the modern era, but using new materials that are more readily available since that modern period. Again, the whole idea of using those new materials to solve problems, okay, or more modern problems. The proposed canopy will be attached to the 1974 structure again and not visible for the street. So the canopy that's going to be actually going over this area between these two structures is actually going to be on the newer portion of the chapel, or the newer chapel, rather than on the older chapel. So the impact of that canopy is actually not going to be on the chapel, the existing chapel. That's actually the structure that we're really looking at. However, this 1974 sanctuary is getting close to being having its own historic value. So as a result, we again need to be thinking about, things that are in their own time. So, they're products of their own time. So I really don't think with the types of materials that are being asked for the canopy that it's a problem. It's consistent with that 1974 chapel. They had similar types of materials were used in the construction of that structure. So I don't think that there's any kind of issue with that, but it is, I just want to make it clear that that is actually being connected to that later addition, not to the chapel where the basis for the site file is the basis of that structure. Because if you read through the site file, it's very specific to the Faith Chapel that they're really looking at. That whole campus has really tried to maintain that style, stylistically in the mission style, the Mediterranean style. So they've done a really good job doing that, but there is really differences between that 1950s chapel and the newer chapel. So I just want to make that clear to everybody. The proposed changes are consistent with the existing style, and the windows being replaced is not a stylistic window. The proposed door has a postmodern appearance, but this area of the chapel, again, has several different window styles, so I don't think it's gonna be out of place. You have at least two different, window styles in the particular frame that you can see right before this section in the staff report. And again, the area is not visible from the street. The proposed changes will have little or no impact on the historic district. The proposed area of alteration is barely visible from the sidewalk, so while historically the integrity of this property may be impacted, the overall district should not be impacted by this improvement. The proposed canopy, again, is barely visible from the street, and the canopy is similar in appearance to the existing aluminum awnings that overhang the current doors that are part of this structure. The proposed alteration will not impact the overall size and massing of the contributing structure and will not impact the surrounding structures because it's not really visible. There's no additional landscaping that is proposed with the application. Since the area of alteration is barely visible from the street, the use of new materials will have no impact on the distinct architectural style. Again, because it's not affecting the Faith Chapel, it's affecting the other sanctuary. The proposed alterations are consistent with the various buildings on site. The proposed alterations are consistent with the Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation guidelines and rehabilitating historic structures. The proposed alterations are consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and land development code. And again, because these improvements are going in to improve ADA accessibility, it's something that makes it even more so appropriate, okay? Because they're actually trying to comply with more current codes than what is currently visible on that site. So as a result, staff is recommending approval of the application to remove a window, add a new door and side light, add ramped walkways between the structure, and place the canopy over the walkway. And with that, I can answer any questions that you may have.
Would the applicant, Mr. Hoffman, like to speak on behalf of this application? Sure.
My name's Ed Hoffman, Hoffman Architects, 29 West Orange Street. Yeah, this I think is probably the smallest project that I've ever presented to anybody. But here we are. We're following the rules. This actually, the sanctuary, the 1950 sanctuary, which is only 1 year older than me, very historic. It doesn't seem like it's that old from my viewpoint. But anyhow, it is on the edge of the I guess, most eastern part of the district. And it was this building that was, I guess, brought on to the district. So, you know, the face of it. So I'm not sure if actually that canopy is in the district or not. And that's why it's connected to this 1974 edition. I just wanted to particularly point out, as Heather said, so she did a great presentation for me. Thank you very much. That the big issue that was going on here is that the chapel, 1950 chapel, we put in a handicap ramp to get you in the front doors from Tarpon Avenue. But the only access to the restrooms or to the rest of the sanctuary, to the other parts of the facility, the only handicap access are coming back out the front door and actually going all the way around the block. And so this makes a direct connection between, if you went out the back doors, you can go down some 8.5-inch riser. I mean, it's dangerous for anybody, much less anybody handicapped. So we're making a connection through from the chapel sanctuary into the narthex of the main sanctuary in a flowing way. And the canopy makes it work so that in inclement weather, they can still, make that trek. So it takes you to the main sanctuary, which then brings you to the restroom. So it's all accessible. So that's the main driver of it, and why the trustees of the church are so anxious to get this done. So I guess I'm just here for questions from this point. Thank you.
Does the board have any questions?
Will you entertain a motion?
Well, first I need to ask if we have anybody opposed to this application in the audience. Anyone that would like to speak in support of the application? Okay, then I will,
I do have a question.
yes.
Mr. Hoffman, the door that we can see in this view that you present to us here, does that existing door access the same area that where the window is?
Correct, it does.
And what will happen to the function of that door?
We're just leaving that door as it is.
Will it be functional?
Yes,
Okay, it's just that the handicap access will be at the window.
right. And that, there's two reasons for that. One is it's more of a direct flow. The other is that we're using a full light door so that you can see the visibility. You know, you can see that the door, if we match the existing style of that door, that original door, it's a solid plank
Right.
door. And so in this situation, we're dealing with a number of people. And so that visibility is a very important thing. We're also bringing light into the space, which the window did previously. So that's the main reason behind that.
And is the existing door ADA compliant as far as the width and?
Yes. I'm sorry, the existing door, the blue door, you're looking there on the very far left?
Yeah.
I doubt highly that that's considered an ADA compliant door because of the step down there.
Yeah, there's steps up to it, and
So, I mean, it doesn't look like you can see, it looks like it's very low, it's not like anything, but there is a step there. And the step up from there to the edge where the threshold of the door is, it's a higher step. So anybody, they'd have to do a ramp, and when you deal with ramping and that type of thing, you have to bring it down at a certain pitch. If you go too high of a pitch, if somebody was in a wheelchair, they would roll right off of it. So as a result, this is not probably the appropriate place to do it because they would have to zigzag, and we're gonna have this not attractive handicap accessibility ramp just to get people in that door.
My other question would be the width of the door, was that ADA compliant? And
I doubt very highly there because it's older.
Okay.
Yeah, it's older, and we wouldn't have had those modern day specs at that point.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Do I hear a motion from the board?
I would approve to make a motion to approve the application as submitted.
Second? Second? Roll call, please.
Ms. Johnson?
Yeah.
Ms. Page?
Yes.
Ms. Protomitis?
Yes.
Mr. Tunstall?
Yes.
Mr. Bolton?
Yes.
Chairman Kolianos?
Yes. Thank
okay,
you.
thank you very much.
For being patient with us with the storm, we really appreciate you letting us reschedule your application. Didn't quite happen, but we need to be careful for others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next application is CA 16-42, 1016 Banana Street. Install an open-sided structure with a wooden roof over an existing 16 by 16 concrete patio. Heather?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, this again, the applicant is requesting a certificate of approval for the following work: to construct a wood pavilion over a 16 by 16 concrete patio at 216 Banana Street. The architectural style is frame vernacular. The future land use of this property is RU, and the zoning is R60. The structure was constructed in 1939 as an example of residential architecture in the Depression/New Deal era. The structure, again, is frame vernacular style and is a contributing resource. The residence is cross gable with a steep pitched roof with a moderate overhang and exposed rafter tails. The south side of the structure has a porte-cochere supported by turned wood posts. The exterior plan of the residence is irregular in shape, and the exterior fabric is a weathered board. There is a 1.5 story stucco garage at the rear of the property, which is the reason why I asked the applicant to provide us a schematic or a site plan, which is in your packet, to show the location of that 2-story structure, because the maps that I have in there, the aerial is really got a lot of cover, so you can't see well on the aerial what's actually on this property, which is why we asked this applicant to provide us So you could have a good understanding when I start talking about the zoning pieces for this, why this is compliant not only with your historic preservation guidelines, but also the preservations. When the other piece of this is we also need to be looking to make sure that they're meeting the LDC requirements at the same time. This is something that we, at the planning department, we kind of gloss over it here, but it's something that we look at. So I want you to still be recognizing that we're still looking at that information and trying to work with applicants to make sure that they're meeting the land development code so that your certificates of approval that go out the door are still consistent with the land development code and the regulations for the next step, which is permitting. So that's what's in blue here on the footprint is the actual patio is under that footprint. And in your packet as well, there is actually a drawing that they've drawn out. It's fairly good. I mean, our reproduction's getting a little bit better. We got a new copier, but it's still not as good as I would like it. It shows you what that structure is actually going to look like physically on that property, okay? Again, the applicant is seeking the certificate of approval to construct the wood pavilion shown in blue here over the existing 16 by 16 concrete patio. The proposed pavilion is located at the rear yard and is not visible from Banana Street. It's also going to be limitedly visible from the rear alley because of that two-story, well, it's really a story and a half garage, according to the site file. It's not going to be visible from either of those streets. The proposed pavilion will be constructed of wood, which is consistent with the primary structure on the property and the other contributing structures in the area. You have quite a few structures here in this area that are frame vernacular style. So this is consistent with those other structures that are in the area. On to 2, the main structure is not being altered, so this number 2 is really not applicable here. The proposed changes will have little or no impact on the historic district. The proposed patio is not visible from the street, and the roof line of the pavilion is similar in structure to the residence. So when you look at the sketch of the building, you can see that that building has a very similar pitched roof and that type of thing. Again, it's going to be a much smaller structure, so it's not going to have the same appearance as the cottage kind of has. It's really going to have a different experience. The picture on the roof is a little bit different, but it's similar. It's not exactly the same, but it is a similar structure. The proposed pavilion will have asphalt shingles, which is the same roofing material currently on the residence. Right now, what's shown on the master site file is a composite shingle. That composite shingle is very similar to an asphalt shingle. They're nearly identical, according to Anthony, who has now been giving me a schooling on what shingles are for these different types of things that are coming through under Florida product approval, to make sure that we're applying the historic district's provisions correctly. That asphalt shingle is very similar to the composite shingle that's on the existing structure. So we'll have that similar look to the shingles that are there. Now the color may vary because we don't look at color. So the colors may vary from time to time on these types of structures, but it is the same type of use, or the same type of product. The proposed pavilion will not impact the overall size and massing of the contributing structure and will not impact the surrounding contributing structures, really, because it's not visible from the district, from the street. There's no additional landscaping that's proposed with this application. The main structure is not being altered, so number 7 is not applicable. The proposed pavilion is consistent with other structures on site. The proposed pavilion is consistent with the Secretary's interior standards of rehabilitation and guidelines rebuilding historic structures. And the proposed pavilion is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the land development code. Basically, what I want to say to this is the setbacks for the R60 district would allow this structure to go closer to the alley than it's actually at. So it's meeting not only its side setback requirements, but also the rear setback requirements, and any of the distance criteria that would be required between structures is also met here. So it is clearly meeting the LDC requirements here, and it is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So as a result, again, there's no impact on archaeological sites, will not be impacted by this, and staff is recommending approval of the application to construct a wood pavilion over the existing 16 by 16 concrete patio. And I can answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, does the board have any questions for the city at this time?
I do. Is the structure is pretty big as far as, not size, but as far as it's kind of built like the roof of the house, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So the storage garage on the back that's now a two-story cottage, this isn't a potential addition to the cottage, is it?
If it's a potential addition to the cottage, they're not showing us currently any I'm trying to think of the word, any connection between the structures. Okay, so as a result, they're allowed they're allowed additional structures on the property under the code, not the historic stuff aside, just under the land development code part. They're allowed a number of different types of structures. You can have a storage structure, you can have a garage. In many places, you can convert those garages, especially the historic district. A lot of the garages were converted to living units. Our code allows for all those type of things. So those are all consistent. But there's no connection shown between the current patio and pavilion that's going to go there. The proposed pavilion is going to be there in that additional structure. So this will not be an addition to that structure. It's just an addition to the property as a whole. And so it meets the criteria of the land development code. But that's a really good question. If they decide to combine those roofs together, that's going to require them to come back here because they're not currently showing that as part of this. But it looked like from the structure, the way they're doing it, it's basically just going to be a wood pavilion roof, and they're going to have some screening on there. So while the raftering system probably could be tied in if they chose to in the future to, to make it like a, front entryway or something like that, they'd still have to come back here and talk to you guys about that, because even though it is in the rear of the property, no one's going to see it, that type of thing, they still are going to have to meet that burden of proof to tie that structure together, because there is historical value to that additional structure on the property simply because it's on the site file. How I found out it's a story and a half instead of 2 stories like the application says was I read the site file to go through that stuff. So there is a difference in that site file from what our folks saw. Now, is it possible that it's been altered since that thing? I'm sure it is possible, but again, that alteration should have been brought forward to this board. I found nothing that this property's currently gone through there. So I'm willing to think that 1.5 stories versus 2 stories, it is what it is. People just assume that it's a really 2-story structure when it's only what we consider 1.5.
Thank you.
Yeah, so right now, the way it's shown is it's a solid structure, but that's a good question, because they could do that in the future if they chose to, because again, it's a wood system, they can intertwine those wood systems, but they're on notice as of this application. If it's not consistent with this, Anthony's folks will let me know, and it will not get passed through permitting, essentially.
I have
Would the applicant like to speak in favor of this application? Do we have the applicant here?
Is the applicant present? Maybe not.
Okay. Yeah, excuse me, I was wondering also, with David's question, what the distance was between the 16 by 16 patio to that 2-story back structure.
There's sufficient distance between the two. On this site plan, I can't tell you. What they told me was 10 feet, but again, that they're telling me that, they're not showing me that. Because I can tell you right now, mine's not to scale. This one's not to scale, and the one that was emailed to me is not to scale.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Can I, you can probably answer this now, and we can adjust it, but the roof line, is that east to west or north south?
Ooh, that's a good
And the
question.
screening, will that be on the south and north ends, or
That's a good question. I wish the applicant was here for that, because that is a good question on how they're orienting it, because it wasn't clear from the,
and I was also curious about the open-ended, roof cables, the trusses coming through. It says there's a drip edge, but the scale drawing we have doesn't show whether there's
yeah, those are not clear on this drawing. I mean, you can see that that's there, but there's no clear indication. It says that there's plywood. There's no clear indication if the asphalt shingle goes out that far,
if we,
or if that's going to be open on this end based on what they have here.
I only ask because both of the other structures in the pictures that were provided show that they have open-ended.
Yeah, that's part of this particular thing. They have the wood turn post and the open rafter look.
Right.
That's certainly something that we can put on as a condition if you want that it have that open rafter appearance so that it's consistent with the other structures.
I think so, because it is actually from where I drive, it is visible from Banana Street in certain directions, so if it fell in line, and I would also assume that they're going east to west with the roof line, because.
I would assume that as well, but again, I can't prove that from
Right,
what we have here. It's not clear.
And it's a 16 by 16, so you can't really tell.
Exactly, because it's gonna be a box, so it may be, and that's the other question that you have. If you're gonna make that condition that it has the exposed rafter look, it's gonna have to have that on all four corners. It's not gonna matter whether it's east-west or whether it's north-south, or whether it's north-south. They're gonna need that look on all four corners because it's a square structure.
Right.
So, I mean, that's up to the board. If you guys are interested in doing a condition, we could basically say, the condition could simply state that, that you choose to approve the application with the caveat that the appearance for the structure would have that open rafter appearance on the ends of the building to match what the existing house is. Something to that effect.
It's going over the existing patio?
Correct.
To me, this does not look like 10 feet between the patio, just from the photograph. Maybe I'm
On
seeing it.
this
Yeah, I was looking
thing
at that too.
here, that one, it looks like they're pulling it off a little further off than what the grill, that little thing is.
Right.
It looks like, but
No,
that
this
also
is
shows
this is the rear house.
air conditioning equipment for the
Does.
storage garage.
Does. And you can see the air conditioning in this photograph. And
Do we have anyone, opposed to this application? And anyone here that would like to speak in favor of it? Do we have any other discussion from the board? Do I hear a motion, about this application?
If we were gonna make a motion, I would certainly like to see those two issues addressed. And I don't see anybody here that can really answer those questions right now, but.
So we can make a motion with a condition?
You can make a motion with conditions, however, what are the two things we want to address? The open rafter look is one thing, but if it's the distance between the structures, you cannot approve this tonight if you're going to deal with the distance of the structures. Because right now, the way this application reads is it's on that existing patio based on the 16 by 16, which is what that patio is. So if it's an issue of you want to know the distance between, that's something you're gonna have to defer this application and ask the applicant that question.
My only conditions were the roof line direction, east, west, north,
Okay.
south.
Is distance
And,
between structures in our purview? Is it something?
Not generally, but you can ask for that clarification because it's not clear on your site report, on your site plan. It's not consistent based on their drawing. You can ask that information. It's not really relevant information for you guys to have because you don't really look at that. But you can ask for that.
only because of the use of, like you said, the structure, will it be used for storage or not, and, what's happened. But like you had already said, they'll have to revisit that later. Also, did you want to clarify the direction of the building, east-west or north-south?
You can ask
That
for
would
that
be-
as a condition, and it would read something like, at the time of permitting, the applicant is to clarify with the planning staff that the structure is either if you want east-west facing versus north-south facing, you would clarify which one is your preference. So you would make it consistent, and then they would have to meet that condition. So if you want it east-west or north-south, that's something that you would determine here tonight, and then the staff would put that condition on the approval that goes out to the applicant. And then obviously, again, we would do the exposed rafter, would be the second one. If you want, you'd put the condition of that you want it to have that exposed rafter appearance to be consistent with the principal structure, if that's the pleasure of the board.
I'm just wondering if we should defer this application until next month, until we can get further clarification, or would the board like to go ahead and make a decision on this with the conditions that we've been talking about?
I would personally like to move forward with a motion with those conditions. I mean, I hate to hold up a resident's improvement of their property for an improvement that's not even visible from the street. over
Do you
just
wanna,
a-
do you wanna clarify the east-west, that they just provide, that they, at the time of providing, permitting, just provide the east-west versus the north-south orientation for that structure? Will that satisfy the board? Or, because it's not gonna come back to you, right? Like, if you decide this tonight, it goes through the permitting folks, it doesn't come back here, so you would not know that.
Yeah, I just noticed that it wasn't on there, so I was just curious if you knew. And I don't really have a preference because there's multiple roof lines on that property
Okay.
as it is, so it doesn't matter.
So do we need a
I would-
condition for that, or it's completely up to you guys? You tell me.
I mean, it's not gonna go diagonal, so I guess it doesn't really matter.
It would be interesting for him to try to do that on a square patio.
As far as the open rafter appearance, is that something, that you feel,
I think that's a legitimate,
Yeah.
that's a legitimate
Question?
concern.
so that might be a condition of the motion?
Which was
The open rafter
Yeah,
appearance
that I
to
think
match
should
the
be-
That they are
existing
matching.
house.
I think that condition should
Okay,
be required.
so
Okay.
how we're gonna, let me read
Okay.
this in so you guys will have it for your motion. They can just say as recommended by staff. Applicant is to provide open rafter appearance on the four corners of the structure of the pavilion, make it specific. To be consistent with other structures on the property. That, everyone's happy with that? Other structures on the property?
Would you like to make that motion?
Yes, I'll make a motion
That to approve it with those
to
conditions?
approve with those conditions for sure.
Brad?
Yep.
Do I hear a second? Carrie? Okay. Roll call, please.
Ms. Johnson?
Yeah.
Ms. Page?
Yes.
Ms. Protomitis?
Yes.
Mr. Tunstall?
Yes.
Mr. Bolton?
Yes.
Chairman Colianos?
Yes.
And just for the record's sake, we are going to strike the alternate's vote from the record, as she should not be voting on a motion before the board.
Oh, we're glad she came.
We are.
All right, our next application this evening is CA 1649, City of Tarpon Springs, 116 North Ring Avenue. This is a demolition of the contributing altered structure.
Sorry about that. Still on our last application. Okay. Again, the it's the city who is making this request, and the application is for a certificate of approval for a demolition of a contributing but altered structure and a shed that is on the property. This property is contributing but altered. And what I've done is, before we kind of get into the staff report, just to tell you a little bit about the materials that are here for you. We had Denise Mann with the library kind of work with us on this, and we went through kind of like a tutorial through time to determine when the principal structure was removed from that property, because clearly with the location of where the secondary or the outbuilding structure is that is now a principal structure, there had to have been some type of principal structure. So in your packet is a listing of the Sanborn maps and some information that shows like when things fell off of time, and I'll go through a little bit of that when we go through the history of this. But essentially what's being requested today is a demolition for this structure because it's been deemed by our building official to be maybe not falling down is the right word, but it's really in bad repair. The city got this property, and we really need to be good stewards of what's donated to the city. This was donated to the city a number of years ago, and since then there has not been any type of maintenance or repair or any of that type of thing. The home is what the home was when it was donated here. Personal belongings have been removed and that type of thing, but basically the house stands the way it was when it was donated. As a result, the city is looking at all of the properties here that we have in the city and what the utilization rate is for those and what we're doing with those and how we're maintaining the buildings that we have and that type of thing. in a manner to ensure that things are safe. They're maintained in a safe manner. This building is one of those buildings that it was an outbuilding. As a result of being an outbuilding, it was not really well constructed. It was later turned into a residence with several different additions that were placed on there. And you can see through, if you go through all the pictures that the building department has provided for this application, you can see the condition of most of what's going on here. The flooring system is not connected. The main structure is not connected to the additions. The roof line is not connected to the additions. So those additions are sitting there separately mounted, but there's no cross connection and they're not tied into the main structure. That in itself is a concern. If anybody were to get into that structure from a safety perspective, that's really a concern that they might get hurt because of the situation with it not being tied well together. That being the case, I'll go through the staff analysis that we have here, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background to understand. Right now, the city does not have a plan. I'm going to make this very consistent because you may hear from people in the public tonight about proposed uses of this property. Right now, the city does not have a plan for this property. The Board of our commissioners have not made a determination on what is to go on this property. This is just a request to demolish a building that we feel is structurally unsound and a danger to our community. Okay, and you'll hear from the building official about that tonight. There are lots of potential options for development on this property if the structure is, if you guys agree to remove that structure and that structure is removed. There are lots of different uses that can happen on this property, but there is no one use that has been determined at this point for this property. This is just the demolition request. There will be a later request for whatever the board decides that they would like to put here, and then you will evaluate that to determine if that's consistent with the heritage preservation ordinance and with the ideals of this board for the historic district. Okay, so just want to make that clear going in, because you're going to hear from public on one particular use, but that has not been established, and I want this board to clearly understand that at this point. Okay,
Can I just ask?
Yes, ma'am.
What is the zoning on this property?
the zoning on this property is conditional residential mixed. Okay, basically what that is it's a category where it allows for some more multi-family type uses. It's the same type of category that we had on that one piece on Center Street adjacent to the Eco Village project. That is the same zoning category. So it would allow attached structures. However, that had to go make another step because attached structures require conditional use by the board. So the board has to fine for a conditional use. It allows for some multifamily, it allows for single family. It allows for detached or attached versus detached structures. It just basically that use, the uses that are allowed, some require conditional use, just like all of our land use districts. Some of them are uses by right. The uses by right that you're allowed on this property are pretty much single family, just what's consistent with the neighborhood here. However, there are other conditional uses that could be recommended for this property. Okay. And we can get into the one particular use that you might hear if you'd like. We can talk about that. But let me go through the staff report. I just wanted to give you guys a really good base so that you understand, just what the general public is coming from. I'm giving you what's going on here currently at the city with this piece of property. There's really no other plan other than dealing with the sun-safe structure. Okay. And with that, let me move on so we're not here all night. Okay, according to the master file for 116 North Ring Avenue, the building on the property is a contributing but altered structure. The building is listed as an outbuilding or garage with a construction date of roughly 1920. The architectural style is frame vernacular, and the structure has two additions with a construction date of 1970, and this again is proximate. The most recent use for the building was residential, and the structure was converted to a private residence at some point in the past. Again, we get into the history that Denise kind of pulled out for us through our Sanborn maps. It appears that the property in 1960 was developed sometime prior to, at 116 North Ring was developed sometime prior to 1909. And it shows the property was developed with one structure, a main house. And then if we go on, it shows that the main house and an outbuilding were was later converted to the residence was in there at 1913. So the master site file says 1920 is circa the building. However, the Sanborn maps show it on there clearly, as you can see in the backup, in 1913. So we challenge our own site file on that one. But according to Niece Manning's research and city lore, it suggests that at some point in 1970, the main house was destroyed by fire. She couldn't provide me anything from the newspaper or anything. There just wasn't really good record for that. It's really just what folks remember. The city of Tarpon Springs received the property as a gift from Miss Jessie Burke, and the structure on the property has remained vacant since the property was given to the city. Again, the structure is in very poor condition. The city's building official has provided extensive photographic evidence of the state of the structure, as well as the lists of codes and structure is currently violating. The building official has determined that the structure in its current state will likely not survive a relocation attempt. It has been further determined that any attempt to renovate the structure will require the entire building envelope to be removed and stripped down to the framing. Given that it is likely that any attempt to renovate the structure will result in a multitude of issues being identified, it's increasing the cost and time required to rehabilitate that structure. It is likely, given the structure's current condition, and many significant features will likely be damaged in any attempt to renovate. If you're going to skin that structure down to its frame, you're going to lose anything that's historically valuable about that structure, anything that's unique, because everything's going to come off, and you know what's going to happen with the wood in the state that it's in. It's going to disintegrate. The city is requesting permission to demolish the structure and the associated shed, and at this time, the condition of the structure makes it uninhabitable and unsafe. Analysis, and again, these criteria are a little bit different than the criteria that we went over last night, the rest of the night, because this is specifically for the demolition section. We're not looking at new construction here. We're only looking at demolition. So that's just so Carrie and you guys who haven't seen these, you'll understand the difference in the staff reports. The structure was originally constructed as an outbuilding garage. The structure has been altered with 2 additions. According to the building official, the 2 additions are not structurally connected to the original structure. This is not the only example of an outbuilding being converted to living quarters. We have several of those, surprisingly more than I realized. I realized until I did this research how many in our historic district have been converted to living quarters, which is an interesting trend. Many of the buildings in the historic district have been converted in the past to living quarters. There are several examples of frame vernacular architecture in the immediate area, and the structure may be contributing to the district, but it is not unique. Number 2, the conversion of the outbuilding to living quarters within the historic district is not unique to Tarpon Springs Historic District or associated with any particular ethnic group. The conversion of the outbuilding structure, the structures like this example have occurred all over the country. This particular example of frame vernacular architecture is not unique, and the condition of the structure makes it a burden on the historic district as a whole, again, because it's not being maintained and you're really moving in a way to try to, make some real strides with the letters and things that we've sent earlier in this year to try to get folks to come in and do some improvements in the district. We're trying to get people to come in and improve that. It really doesn't set a good example that our own properties here in the city that are in the historic district are in such disrepair. Other homes in the area that are currently being restored. The structure is a simple wood construction with wood shingles, and the condition of the existing structure would make it nearly impossible to restore. There is no special or distinct features on the structure. The structure is not unique. There are far better examples of frame vernacular construction in the immediate area, and is not the last remaining example of its kind in the city. Due to the condition of the structure, it would be nearly impossible for the structure to be utilized. The building official has deemed the structure unsafe and inhabitable. The lot, if cleared for the structure, could be developed in a meaningful way that could enhance the historic district. Since the property is a city-owned, it would not likely be returned to residential use immediately. But we're not going to rule out the fact that it could, at some point, revert back to a private residence in the future. We don't know what that use is going to be right now. So I don't want to say, it's never going to be residential again, because it's not a true statement. It could at some point in time. It would become an open space until a proper civic use can be determined for the site, or alternatively, that the city decides to sell it back to a private individual, which I don't think is going to happen. It's not in the cards, but it is a possibility. The condition of the structure makes it makes it nearly impossible to restore. The building official does not suggest attempting relocating the structure. The foundation is cracking and separating, and the additions are not structurally connected to the main structure, and the flooring system, roofing system are unsafe. The structure is in its current condition is not capable of earning a reasonable return. The structure has remained vacant since the property was donated to the city. At only 450 square feet, the structure is non-conforming in the zoning district. The minimum floor area of the conditional residential mixed zoning district is 900 square feet. Again, this building would have some non-conforming status, but based on what the building official is saying about if it were to be restored, what would it take to restore it, the likelihood that it would be allowed to actually come back in the same form that it's in would be unlikely, because most folks would probably want to add additional square footage. That then takes it out of the non-conforming status. They would lose all the vesting for the existing setbacks and all that type of thing that are allowed for non-conforming structures. You see this all the time. You see, especially in these applications, you see buildings were built right on property lines and that type of thing. Well, we have zoning requirements now that don't allow that. So trying to have a non-conforming structure that is, removed or renovated, if it doesn't come back in the exact same footprint under the existing requirements in the non-conforming use, they lose that vesting. So then they have to bring it back into compliance with the land development code. So you're likely going to lose the existing setbacks that are shown, that are there and apparent in that structure right now. All right. The building official states in his report that the renovation of the structure would require a wholesale stripping of the structure down to the framing, and this would likely result in further reducing the size of the structure, as the additions were not structurally integrated into the main structure. Again, it would increase the nonconformity under the nonconforming section, we would not be allowed it to be replaced under the land development code. So this is a place where your land development code clearly is in conflict. Your nonconforming use section is in conflict with your heritage preservation section based on what improvements are being required by the building official. It is not economically feasible to restore the structure given the unknowns of the plumbing system, the electrical system, the roofing system, the flooring system, and the structural integrity of the structure. Moving the structure is not recommended by the building official given the current condition of the structure. And again, LDC section 2403 restricts the movement of non-conforming structures. Relocation of this structure within the historic district would require a variance by the Board of Adjustment. So in order to relocate it, unlike what we did with the cottage down here with Eco Village, you're going to have to get approval from BOA, another board, to essentially do that. And we're telling you, or your building official is telling you, that based on the condition, he doesn't think that that's a feasible option. Where it was more of a feasible option for the little cottage that did get moved, it's not in this case. So with that, staff is recommending approval of this application for the demolition of a contributing but altered structure and the shed on the property. And I can answer any questions that you might have. Anthony is also here if you have technically related questions to condition. That's really his purview, not mine. He's the one who's made that call as far as it being an unsafe structure and that type of thing. So depending upon what your comments are, we can bring Anthony up and he can kind of talk, or you guys can have question and answers. It's completely up to you.
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
On the property appraiser general information sheet, normally when you look at it, when the property changes hands, the dates are there. It's considered a sale date. They're missing on here.
You mean the sell dates?
Yeah, the date that the property changed hands.
And I honestly
when
can't.
it came to the cities, that's, I mean, that's standard. It's on there. That had to have been whited out. That's a concern.
Well, it wasn't whited out by us. I mean,
Okay, it just seems.
it looks like,
I mean, when the property changes hands, that's usually right there on the sale date. What's the date that the city became stewards of this property?
that's a good question. I honestly do not know the date that it was actually, could give me that information on when it actually was turned over to us.
My concern is that the city has been, or this board and people in the city, it's been very common that we've been trying to prevent demolition by neglect. We don't know how long this applicant has owned the property. What did the property look like when it came to their ownership? Those are two very, very relevant things. Personally, I think the property is probably too far gone, but I don't like that we're not given those two pieces of information.
Understood.
I'd like to bring out, this Florida Master Site File was done in 2009, and at the bottom, it says the condition of the property was good at that time. So, you know, I don't know when the city took it over, but apparently when this structure was appraised by, you know, actually people from the city that were paid to appraise it, they said the structure was in good condition.
I can't,
That was only 7 years ago.
I
so-
can't really speak to that because one, I don't know when the city actually took over the property. And I don't know, you know, I wasn't here when 2009 when these were done, so I don't have enough history to give you a really good understanding of, yes, that was, you know, they put it on all the houses or whatever. I can't tell you that. I can't tell you what went on at 2009 as far as when these were done, you know, how applicable they are. I know I found errors on them, but an error in a date is a little bit different on a condition, right? An error in a date is a guess. I mean, they're guessing if they don't have good understanding of when structures were built, you know, back during that time, you don't know the date. You have to guess based on the style. And again, the main house is missing here. So, right, the biggest part of that where you can guess the date is missing. So I wouldn't question their condition report based on the couple little things that I found over time on dates. You know, you're talking about different things. So I can't really speak to what's happened since this building came into the city's possession.
I have additional questions. I
Yes,
can keep
go
going. Normally we've had, when applicants have presented for demolition, they've had an engineer other than themselves. So this is the city engineer speaking for the city's application.
City's a building official, not an engineer. Just so we make
So
sure.
it's not an engineer.
Not an engineer. This is the city building official.
And the attorney can speak if I get out of line, so let me know.
I will, don't worry.
Every other application we've had for demolition has required an engineer report. This board has required that for every application. So is that just us being overhand on the other ones because it's not in here that we have to have an engineer report, or is it in our?
It's not a requirement of your criteria.
So all the times we've asked for it before and leveraged that against people wanting to do
That's
demolition.
correct. You have asked for contractors' reports or something to that effect. Now, you as a board can determine what requirements or what things that you want, but there is nothing right now currently in that section that says you must provide this. Now, when you get into, this is my issue, if you remember, we went a few months back in December when we went through a demolition and a new construction based on economic hardship. If you go to the economic hardship section, those are outlined there. So under economic hardship, you require a higher burden of proof than you currently do under your demolition section. Good, right, or indifferent, that's the situation with that code provision.
Okay.
I'm not going to, determine that this board can make that recommendation on what you want in that criteria, and we can certainly bring forward a change to your language. There's already going to be one coming up anyway that we'll talk about in a couple of months, but that aside, you can set those parameters, or at least ask the board through your staff to set those parameters where you put that bar where you want that bar.
Okay. Additional question, sorry.
That's okay.
Is this structure on a zero lot line? Is it built right on the lot line?
It's not built right
So
on the
you
lot
can
line.
actually walk around the property?
Correct. You can walk around just barely the back of the property before you get into the adjacent areas.
Okay, and is there any public record, and you may or may not know this, so if you know this off the top of your head, is there been any in the sun discussion on a workshop or anything from the commissioners, or has it been brought up in public record?
There has been discussions on this particular property, or at least allusions to this particular property on future uses at the Board of County Commissioners. The use that's been discussed is potentially a community garden. However, So everyone's aware on this board. If you look at conditional residential mixed, community gardens are not currently an allowed use.
Okay.
Not conditional, not permitted, nothing. It's silent to that effect. So the board's going to have some work if they decide that that's what the future use is. Beyond coming to this board, they're going to have some other work that has to be done to allow that use to go on that property, okay?
What was the use again?
It's a community garden was what's been discussed. And again, it's been discussed in passing at several board meetings. This property's been identified as one potential site. There are other potential sites elsewhere in the city. There's no solid, concrete, this is where this is going. This is really just, it's a speculation that this would be maybe an appropriate place because you have this community facility down the street that you can utilize for bathrooms and that type of thing. But go ahead.
My last questions, unless somebody prompts something else. In the past, so I'm just asking, we have not approved demolition until there was a coinciding application for the next use. Has that been an overstep of this board's?
No,
So
this board
that is
has,
something we can ask for, so not approve it until, that is something, so that was okay when we.
again, there's nothing in the section, in the demolition section that says that you must have it, but procedurally, you are correct. In the past, you have had either an economic hardship request and new construction, or a demolition request and new construction. That's how this has gone, and some of them have been all three.
My
So-
last question, has the city offered this property for free for somebody that wouldn't want to move it and advertise it?
That I'm not aware of. I don't believe that has occurred. Anthony, are you? Anthony has not been privy to that either. So I'm not aware that has occurred.
To be,
And that's something that I could talk to Dr. Monahan about, but I don't think that it's occurred. And basically, it's because of the condition of the existing building right now. It's just been deemed to be, not something that we want to invest. They don't want to spend a lot of time investing in. Now, that doesn't say that it doesn't warrant it, just that it hasn't been done, to my knowledge.
I'll yield to other board members. Questions?
I had this might be ridiculous, but the city's
Nothing's ridiculous.
demolished other properties that they've owned in the past,
That's
historic
correct.
properties like on Tarpon Avenue. Do you guys have any precedent for recycling materials during the demolition process, especially of properties this old?
I have absolutely no idea the answer to that question because I don't have enough of that historical thing. My inclination would be probably no, because a lot of the buildings that you're dealing with here, depending upon the age, this one's not so much an issue, but you have asbestos intrusion and other things that have happened that don't make those materials as resaleable because of that cross-contamination. Now, that's not every building in Tarpon.
Sure.
That's some buildings that asbestos was used just across the board in so many things. We don't think about it, but even a frame vernacular house could have asbestos tiles. It could have had asbestos on the walls. It could have had, any number of it. And so there's cross-contamination that happens even if it's been removed correctly. There's still cross-contamination for that building. And I don't know the situation with this building. I'd be likely to believe that asbestos probably wasn't used because of the time frame for when this was built. This was built in a time balloon construction had just come off, had started happening in that 10s, right in there. The 1900 through 1910 was the time that balloon construction just started happening. Nails were starting to become mass produced. Wood was becoming a little bit more readily available. Their new construction techniques wasn't quite, it was the beginning of the modern period. It wasn't quite, where the modern period was, where they get into steel and glass and different types of construction, but there was a lot of mass producing of things like nails and that type of thing. So I don't know that asbestos was actually put in this building at any point, but any type of renovations that were done in the 50s or the 70s are suspect, because any of those materials, floor tiles, any of that stuff could have had asbestos in it.
I'm sure everybody here would love to see in the future any projects where you're demolishing historic properties. Maybe we could discuss that with the company that
Sure.
goes in, that we hire, that the city hires to contract that work out.
That's something that's a
Might not be
viable,
better.
sure, that's something that's a viable option in the future.
I think we ought to ask now for anyone in the audience that might be opposed to this, application? Anyone? Okay. Now I'm going to ask for, the applicant. Do you have someone other than you, Heather, that would like to speak in favor of this?
I have Anthony.
Okay.
Does Anthony count? I mean, he's kind of like my alter ego.
Anthony's really
Anthony,
smart.
if you'd like to come to the podium.
Board, Anthony Mastraccio, Building Development Director, City of Tarpon Springs. When this property, I was asked to take a look at this property initially. When I contacted Heather, we knew that it was in the historic district. I've been in construction all my life. I've done this since I was a little kid, and initially went to school for engineering. I came with the city. I've been working in either Pinellas Park or here for the past 21 years. So when we looked at the structure, we took it, with great detail. The structure displays a lot of deterioration, and I'm not sure of the time. I've been here for 13 years with this city. The time that we had taken it was within my timeline. So Ms. Burke had passed within that timeline. I was only at this property once before, and I believed she was hospitalized at that point, and it was in bad shape. But nevertheless, we were never asked to look at the property after that. The way it was constructed, it initially looked like it was an out parcel. I mean, I went up in the rafter system, I checked the flooring, I checked everything. You could tell the way the construction was done, it looked like it was a garage or some type of storage facility. And later on, it looks like it came into the effect where they had some additions added onto the side and rear. And those additions are basically just placed up against the shingles. So there's nothing that tied it together. I can't find anything that holds into a solid foundation system underneath. I went inside the structure. There were some openings in the floors that we explored. From the outside we can see. And unfortunately, it took a lot of damage. To rebuild the structure, of course, you have an option to rebuild it. Is it a viable option? Unfortunately, with this type of renovation to rebuild it, you're going to fall under our existing building code. And at that point, you're going to need to strip the whole outside of the building. You're going to have to structurally attach those additions, strip around the foundation system, make sure we have a secure foundation system, and then rebuild everything above that. And of course, once you touch that, it has to be brought up to the current building code. Yeah, I'm not saying it could be done. The expense might be great, but it could be done. I also looked at the option of moving the structure. I don't believe at all that the additions that were added onto the structure would be able to be moved. Those will not take it. You'll lose those additions right quick. Once you start putting those I-beams underneath the structure, they'll separate and break off pretty quickly. The initial host structure, it's a possibility. You do have a possibility of moving that structure. Whether it'll be viable once it hits the road, even that house that we moved just across the street, it took a lot of damage in just moving it. I'm not sure if it'll make it, but you still do have all those options in the structure. It's a nice structure, and what I understand as the plan for this structure, as Heather indicated, it's nothing in concrete terms. They do wish to make it some kind of public facility. It hasn't been deemed. What I hear, it would bear the name of the person who passed it on to us, but the actual purpose has not been identified to at least us as of this time. Anybody have any questions in reference to the structure itself?
When you were talking about something, a community building, are you talking about the building, the block building that was moved?
Community building, as far as this structure?
Okay, I thought you were speaking about.
No, he was talking about the structure that was moved, that we had the cottage down here moved.
Right,
That was the one he
right.
was kind of referring to, that even that one sustained quite a bit of damage when it went literally right across the street, which thank goodness it went literally right across the street.
Right.
But did you refer to a community facility before? that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I was
No,
wondering
it was
what
that
part-
building there. That's the one I was referring to, the structure, the single family that got moved across the street for the eco-village.
No, I think you're talking about before that, right?
No, I was wanting to know what was, you know, you were saying community building, I thought it was gonna be a,
No, it's that's gonna be probably a private residence
Right,
for
that's
some
what I
period of
thought.
time,
That was
because
my
that's,
understanding.
the zoning there will not allow for anything else. They'd have to rezone that to allow for a different use on there.
Okay.
Because they had talked about maybe making that the office for the eco-village, but it can't be where that is. That's technically the residential area. It's the same zoning as this, where it's that conditional residential mixed.
okay, all right, that's what I thought.
I
Yes.
saw a reference to the FEMA law in someone's notes in here, I think it.
Yes.
Under this situation, if that property was moved, wouldn't that be irrelevant under that FEMA law anyway, because it's based on the property value, not the property, but the actual structure value?
Yeah, it bases off structural value. What we're speaking of is the 50% rule for FEMA. Once you physically alter the structure, and the 50% rule is generated about the cost of the structure as it stands today only. And then 50% of that can be used for renovations. Once you meet that or exceed it, then you have to elevate the structure to meet FEMA's current standards.
Which would make that project irrelevant in the
Yes, sir.
state that it's in now.
Unfortunately, yes, sir.
I think all of our questions, we wanna ask, thank you, Anthony.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to make a public comment approving this application? Okay. Is there any other discussion from the board on this application? Thought about a lot of different things here. Okay. I think, just to mention this, I think that this is representative of one of the problems in the city of neglect of structures that are just left to set and deteriorate over time. And this one, as I'm just observing from the master site file, that was only 7 years ago, but apparently it's been vacant and just sitting. And I wish there was something we could do more, even, I know the cards went out, but if there was any way we could start doing that survey to find out, where these houses are that are sitting and potentially are just deteriorating. Would be good. Do I hear any motion from the board on this
Can I
application?
just say one thing
Yes,
before-
certainly.
I just echoing what you said, because if this were accurate, that it was somewhat salvageable, then it would have been a really nice structure if the commissioners are going forward with what might be out there. It would have been a really nice garden shed or a really nice structure
And
to have
that's
had on the property.
and that's one of those things that we really had looked at as potential before Anthony kind of evaluated the structure, was maybe if they do something with a public use there, maybe we can maintain that structure and use it for something, storage, something, so that we can maintain it. But it's not something that we're going to be able to do, because if it's really unsafe, we don't want people in it.
And that would be even if the unattached sides, that they're speaking of, were removed and just the original little structure was left?
I mean, it's something that's a feasible option, but I don't know that would be based on what's there. Again, I would have to defer to Anthony whether the structure itself is going to be sound enough to use for anything that we would allow the public to be on. If this was a private residence, then we're you're taking the liability on yourself. But when you're talking about the public, it's you have to have ADA compliant facilities and all that type of thing. I mean, maybe a shed is exempt from that, but there's a lot of considerations when you're dealing with the public.
Any other comments from the board? ideas?
I just think it's, everything that's been discussed, I think it's, as you've said, it's sad that we can't be more proactive. But it also seems like the reality is it's not salvageable. I mean, even though I think our hearts are wanting to do something with it, to preserve it, to restore it, I think the reality is, it probably needs to be demolished.
Are you making the motion?
I will make the motion. Yeah.
Do I hear a second for that motion?
I'll second it, with regret.
Roll call, please.
Miss Page?
I recuse myself from this vote.
Okay. Miss Johnson?
Yes.
Miss Protomitis?
Yes.
Mr. Tunstall?
Yeah.
Mr. Bolton?
Yes.
Chairman Kolianis?
Yes. And I guess
Thank
that's-
you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Anthony.
And Anthony, thank you for all your work on this. I really appreciate your help.
We now have come to staff comments.
I have two staff comments, but the first one is the most exciting one, so I'm going to start with that one. This wonderful lady next to me is your new principal planner. Her name is Lisa Wergo. She came to us from Marion County. She lived up in the city of Ocala. She's living here locally, and she's been with us for about 3 weeks now. We're thrilled to have her. I'm going to give her the mic so she can say a few words, but I wanted to go ahead and introduce her to all the boards now that she's been here, and you guys have the first meeting of the month. So other than the one that we had with BOA, because she was here for that, but that wasn't a real meeting. It was a special meeting. So with that, I'd like to introduce Lisa.
Make it very short. I'm very happy to be able to work with y'all and to make this a learning experience for me. I do have a lot of interest in American history, European history, and architecture, so I am looking forward to working with y'all on a regular basis. Thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Okay. The other item that I have for you is the Rose Cemetery is going to be coming forward next month, and it's more of a procedural thing. I'm not going to get into the case because it's they want to designate it a national structure or a national historic register. I'm going to forward that application to you guys, so you'll have a little bit longer to review the materials, because this is a different thing. We don't do it a lot, and we've got a lot of new members on the board. I don't know who was here the last time that they did the last one that they did, so I'm going to go ahead and forward the materials for you. I'm also going to send you that section of the code that applies, because it's a very different section. We're going to be basically your role is more of a appointed board role, where you basically make a recommendation to the board. So I will go over that whole process. If you choose to go forward when we actually hear the application, we'll go over what the next steps are, how you want to participate. If you want to participate, we'll go through that during that hearing. But I just want to you're going to get that material early. You actually are going to have 4 applications at your next meeting. But that application specifically, I'm going to forward that information to give you a longer time to review it, and also that section. You'll get a staff analysis with it as well. It will just come later. I just want to make sure you have enough time to go over that, because it's a very different process, and we have a lot of new members here that may want to do some research on their own to understand or have questions. And I'd be glad to, get you in contact with whoever you need to get in contact with if you need that. And, liaison as much as possible, but I want to get that information out to you. I literally got the application stuff today, so I'm going to be sending it out to you probably tomorrow, so that you can start looking at that stuff. And then it'll get advertised and go out with the normal cycle at the end of this week. So just so you know, that's coming forward. It's more of a procedural thing than anything else, as far as I just want you guys to understand what we're going through, because we have new board members, and this is a different type of application. It's a total different section of the code of what we've applied up to this point. So I want you to have that time to kind of review it, because it's going to be a different type of application and discussion than what we've done previously. And with that, that's all that staff has.
Welcome, Lisa. I'm excited that you're here, and so I want to ask Heather now, when will we be getting minutes for our meeting?
You will be getting minutes as soon as our wonderful secretary gets started, because she's going to be doing, she's actually been offered overtime to get all the boards caught up. So as a result, as soon as she can make herself available to get all those minutes for, I got 3 boards that they need to be done for. One board we've been able to keep up with, which is the TRC board, because we have to in order for applications to move forward. But all the other 3 boards are all behind. So we're going to try to, advance those as quickly as possible. We'll push this board along with the BOA board forward, because basically you guys make your own decisions. You're not a recommending board, and then planning board will get theirs a little bit later. But because these applications, we do still have sent out all the letters on all the applications that you have looked at up to this point, so we're caught up there. It's just the minutes themselves. So we'll move that forward just as soon as Kim can kind of set up a schedule to get your meeting minutes back up so that they're available.
Okay, that sounds good. And I wondered if you have heard any more since the city's discussion on May 17th about moving forward with a new, review of the city historic structures and guidelines.
The guidelines, I started requesting some resources from other places. I've kind of fallen behind the wayside because now Lisa's here and I need to get her up to speed. But I've made some requests on looking at some of the adjacent other communities that are CGL communities. I want to try to get a good sampling of those, and then we'll try to figure out what's the best way to workshop with you guys. If it's just providing those sections to you, and then you guys can provide comments individually to staff, or how we can best do that with the attorney's guidance so that we can start moving forward on that. The other thing that we're going to be looking at is they're going to standardize all the boards and how the boards operate. So absences will be counted all the same no matter what board you're on. When they do that, they're going to be altering, or they're going to ask for alterations to your rules and procedures. So we're going to have to go through in your rules and procedures and look at those sometime in the next few months. We're also going to need to talk about potential updates to your ordinance for historic preservation and what this board is interested in doing, because as we talked about tonight, there is a discrepancy between your demolition section and your economic hardship section, and the burden of proof that you require each of those applicants to provide. When I was new, I did not know that there was a difference, so I took the word of the board until I prepared this last application and went through point by point and said, wait a minute, there is this, but it's only for economic hardship. So if someone comes in and all they're asking for is a demo and a new construction, they're not asking for that. They're not held to the same burden as that person on that economic hardship. Fair or not, that's just the way it is. The other section that I need to bring back for you guys, as we had talked about last year, was the demolition section where we had the waiting period. And I basically had said that my recommendation to this board is that we provide you the avenue and option to do that, but that it's not a mandatory thing. It's at this board's discretion, because sometimes it's going to be warranted and sometimes it's not. And this board is intelligent enough to determine when that happens. You guys know what's happening in this historic district. It doesn't have to be a mandatory thing, because what's going to end up happening if it's a mandatory thing is you had a caveat in the code or in that section that said, well, if we don't want it, we'll just do away with it. Well, then we really should be doing it the opposite way. If you choose it, it will be a tool in your toolbox, right? It'll be one of the options in that code. So that's going to come forward. Your rules and procedure will be updated. Your section for heritage preservation based on the charter and what they're doing with the standardization may need to be updated. We're going to look at all that stuff and try to do one uniform discussion. So we may have multiple meetings to kind of go through all of that, but I'll try to make it as painless as possible so that we can go through that. That may not be the last go at that document. You may need to go again once we get the design manual up and start really looking at that, because you may find that when you look at design manuals, oh, well, there's something in that design manual that really needs to be in the code as well. So we'll look at those type of things too as we go progress through that process. But that's really like the planned work plan for the next few months. Hopefully we get through it before the end of the year. That's my goal, is to try to get all those steps through, and then at least us progressing through the design manual, because if we need to go for the next round of grant funds for anything, if you guys are interested in doing that, I've got to have time to prepare the application. Because what happened with this last grant application is I got all the way through the process with them and they needed additional information. I don't have the staff time to donate to the to that application. So we had to pull that back and withdraw that application. That doesn't look, because I don't want things going forward with our name on it that are half done that they're going to recommend that they don't get funded. I want, when we prepare a grant application going forward, it's going to be a successful grant application. So that's what our idea is try to move this stuff to the forefront. Let's work on it, and then so when we're ready to go forward, because I know our chair would like to sit and go over maybe looking at an archaeology study, or even just the existing locations we have, better documenting that. In order to do that, we've got a lot of steps that you and I are going to be spending some time to put that together, because we need pictures and we need it's a very structured application process. We need to do that and do it right, so it's done the way that this board wants. So it becomes a tool that you can actually utilize. Not just another book that we put on the shelf that we did this. That's not what we're looking for. We want to have concrete documentation. And I really think that you need to be updating the buildings that have been demolished and new buildings that have been come up. That stuff all needs to be updated in our master site file. It's not been done. So those things need to be done, and you need a better tool in your toolbox for the general public to actually be able to search that database. It's not set up to really be user friendly, which is fine, but people are becoming more and more conscious of information, and they want to be able to readily access it. They don't want to have to make a phone call to my office. They want to be able to do it, so we need to come up with a good tool that they can readily access. So, and Mr. Bolton, I didn't forget about you. I'm still working on the clerk's office with how we do title searching and that type of thing as far as historic structures and stuff. That's something that we now are getting some GIS staff on board. So once that happens, I'm going to have them identify all those parcels. Once that's done, it can generate a list for me based on an address locator, and I can just give that to them. I can give the same thing to the folks in building development so that they will have another tool at their disposal. If they can't get a hold of somebody in my office, they don't have to send that person outdoor. That person, they can look down a list and at least say, okay, it's this or it's that. So it's all tools that I'm planning on building, but it's going to take some time as I get Lisa up to speed, and Kim continues to learn, a little bit more about planning as she goes along in her career here. So that's what we're planning on doing. I've heard everybody. It's a lot of things to happen in a very short amount of time. We're going to have to just be, kind of plug along with what we can do. But certainly the minutes are going to be in the forefront of all of that.
Sounds good.
I hope so.
Any other comments from the board? No?
I always have something to say.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I just want to say welcome, and that this, I think, is the most exciting time to be on this board right now. That when I first started on this board, it was with people that had been on the board for 10 plus years, 15 years. It was just kind of a stagnant board, and I just am so excited with all the new people, and we're getting stuff done, and we're willing to wrestle with the things that need to be wrestled with, and so I'm just really, really excited to walk this next year with you guys and see what we can do for our citizens and for the city.
Well said.
Agreed.
And I'm not running for office or anything. That's not why I said that.
I hope not, because we can't afford to lose another board member off of this board.
Okay, meeting's adjourned.
You're right.
Thank you. You as well, Carol.
like to learn something new every time. That doesn't release the city from the burden that they should know what they're required of this property. But what you said teaches me something. Learn something. Absolutely.